We meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mike Reynolds. As you can tell from the English accent, I am British, and this is the Energy Impact Podcast. I'm joined today by the inspiring Energizer Bunny of the energy sector in the UK. I'm meant to be a high energy person, but when you get on stage, Lily, it's a sight to behold. Lily Frencham, who is the CEO of the Association for Decentralised Energy, which is the ADE, which we will refer to it as for the rest of this conversation today. We're going to have an acronym overload, I think, because we were talking British energy and British politics and the connection between the two. Lily, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me and for the kind words. What a start.
Yeah, well, to be fair, it's not even made up. It's you've got a reputation for being, energized and enthusiastic, and I think that's maybe going to be a theme today, isn't it?
I think so. There's a lot of jazz hands, and I think I spent quite a bit of my early time in the energy industry trying to stifle them. But I'm embracing the jazz hands. I think we need more of them. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. More personalities in the energy sector, please.
Absolutely.
So we're going to have a little tour through your history, how you got into this space, your career to date, your job currently, and just hear from you on your personal view and the ADE's view on English, British, Welsh, Scottish, European energy politics and how the push for decarbonisation is going this side of the pond. But why don't you take us back to the beginning, Lily, and sort of tell us, how did you get into this? What piqued your interest in going to energy and climate change?
Yeah, sure. So rolling back, I am actually Australian, which you won't be able to tell by my mostly British accent.
It's there a little bit, but the Americans won't be able to tell it. No.
Yeah, no. It's sadly lost. But so back in my heyday, at uni, I was still in Oz and was at my lovely beachside green uni doing a combination of communications and law. So with the thinking maybe I'd be a journo, or maybe I'd go and be like Erin Brockovich, neither of which ended up being a very good fit for me. So you can imagine my parents' disappointment when I left uni and promptly said I was not going to practice in either of those fields. But I ended up in international development, which I'd always been really passionate about, but hadn't really known how to pin down the label on. And that led me to a job where I was working out in the Pacific Islands, working with islanders on understanding and crucially communicating climate science. So that was a project based out of Australia, but taking the science out to the islands and working with them to distribute it amongst their communities.
And where particularly were you? Which islands were you on for sort of geographical reference?
So it's a huge swathe, but everywhere from kind of Niue, which you mightn't have heard of, but Niue means rock. It's the rock of the Pacific. It's essentially a big rock, which is an island, up through the Cook Islands, Vanuatu, Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, but heading up towards Palau and the Marshall Islands, which might be a bit more familiar to listeners in the States. So 15 islands altogether, all of which are like incredibly different, have their own cultural nuances, and all of which are incredibly friendly. So that was really lovely.
I went to Rarotonga. Did you go to Rarotonga?
Yes, one of my favorite places on earth.
They have a planning policy in Rarotonga where you can only build in Rarotonga if you were born there or you married someone who was born there, which means it's incredibly underdeveloped, which makes it absolutely beautiful.
Yes.
So when were you there, Lily? What and how long were you there for?
Well, this requires me to calculate how old I am, which I
Oh
seem
no,
to forget half
sorry.
the time. But
Awful question.
I think I was there. It would have been about 10 years ago.
Right, okay.
But I was based in Oz, and we'd go out to the islands for a couple of weeks at a time and take like a group of scientists, social scientists, communicators out. But the idea was we would train. It was a train the trainer type thing. So
Yeah.
we would work with the local meteorological service to build their skills,
Right.
but doing all sorts of fun stuff like it's really exciting actually getting people to unlock stuff that they don't realize they know. So we'd do like craft and collages and stuff, and then you turn around at the end of the day and say, well, that's a stakeholder engagement plan. You've made a stakeholder engagement plan for communicating climate.
Yeah.
And seeing people swirl with
Demystifying.
pride.
Yeah, demystifying things that sound a bit wanky and a bit, pompous, and just
Yeah.
making stuff people can do. And it's and climate change is obviously very appropriate for this conversation about the Pacific Islands, right? I mean, they feel it very keenly. They feel the impacts of climate change very keenly. Was it something that came up in conversation while you were out there?
Oh, absolutely. And this is, I guess, I wasn't a climate person. I'm not an energy person by background, and this is where my attachment to working in climate started. Is like they are on the front line and experiencing the impacts. Well, they were experiencing the impacts
Yeah.
10 years ago, including like a loss of traditional knowledge. So, they've always had a very strong connection to nature and understood the way their spaces worked, and that understanding was changing. So traditional tells that would allow them to fish well, or like even to be used for medicines and like social constructs, weren't working anymore, which was really, really sad.
Right. So it wasn't a kind of nebulous other concept. It was an immediate in front of your nose.
It was. But really interesting as well to work with them. Like even in those environments, there's still kind of myths and facts about what's an effective way to battle stuff. So
Right.
often we'd go in and talk to them about the best ways to mitigate against some of the climate things that were coming down the line, and also to try and find some opportunities from them,
Right.
because a changing climate means you're not going to have your traditional seeds perhaps, but you can
Yeah.
use some others that you've never been able to. But often there was still oh, we've heard that mangroves work, so like let's do that, or let's build a seawall. And it's like, actually a seawall's not
Not the
the
right
most
solution.
effective way of dealing
No.
with this. But I guess it happens everywhere, that people get in their heads what the
Do what the
right
Dutch do
thing is.
because it worked in the Netherlands. It must work in Fiji. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's interesting because picking up on the theme of sort of demystifying things and making things accessible for people in their own way and helping them to understand it. That's maybe a theme we can come back to later on, because I think it links very much to what the AD does. But before we get into that conversation, you're an Australian, you're working in the Pacific Islands, doing all this outreach work and having an impact, and somehow you ended up in London. How's that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I wish it was a more strategic, impressive story, but essentially, I had what I'm going to deem an early life breakdown. But like a crisis of confidence, a time of transition,
Right.
and decided that the winds of change were afoot, and I needed to be doing something else. Like my particular project was wrapping up, and I thought maybe time to hot foot out of there. And I was looking at stuff all around the world. I mean, my family have a strong history in kind of doing international work, so I thought that would be nice to pursue. But I was looking at stuff in Myanmar, in New York, kind of accidentally applied for a visa for the UK, thinking I was doing something else. And then when it came through, they were like, yeah, you've got to do that. I said, oh, can I rain check it? Like, no, you have to enter within 28 days as well. And I thought, okay,
So that
well,
made a decision for you.
in lieu of another plan, I'll do that, and see how it goes.
It's funny. Have you ever listened to the podcast from Elizabeth Day? I think it's called How to Fail.
No, but it sounds like something I would love.
Yeah, it's a really good one. It's really good. She interviews a load of successful people like you, right? And and all of them have something in their past where they go, it didn't work, or I failed, or I got it wrong, or I had a crisis of confidence, or I wasn't sure what I was doing. And actually, it's amazing how many times that seems to link to then overcoming that hurdle and moving on and finding success. And maybe that's another theme we can pick up a little bit in the kind of the evolution in your career and how you ended up in the CEO role at the ADE. So you're in London. You've arrived in London. Did you have a job at the time, or is it just like, hell, let's just go for this thing?
I didn't. What I had was a half sister who was living in the southern part of the UK. So she was 16 at the time. Her mum, who is essentially my dad's ex-girlfriend, they were my contacts in the UK, and they were like, well, you can come and stay with us. So they made the room under the stairs into a bedroom for me. Like I was really living out my Harry
Potter. Oh my goodness. But they weren't they were nicer than the Dursleys.
They were so much nicer than the Dursleys. And like were so great. It made me feel so welcome. And I just spent a bit of time looking around at jobs, like applying for all sorts that could work. Based on my experience, and just seeing what kind of a fist I could make of being somewhere else. And I ended up quite bullishly kind of forcing this recruiter to put me forward for a job at Ofgem, which is the Office of Gas and Electricity Markets, our regulator.
Right. This is about as far away as for reference, like culturally, this is the opposite end of the Pacific Islands, right? Like you've gone from a very unstructured way of doing things to, oh my God, this is the book. You must work this way. Everything must be done properly.
I know. It was bonkers.
And you were living under the stairs.
In my defense, and I was living under stairs. In my defense, it was the what I'm going to deem, this is offensive to some people, but the cool side of Ofgem, which is the kind of half of the organization that delivered renewable schemes. Like they were there. Really, actually, upon arrival, this interesting group of bright, passionate people that were there because they wanted to achieve something and like cared about sustainability. They were awesome. I kind of really fluked my way in there, but it was really, really interesting, and I'm very grateful for my time there because it gave me a lot of insight and empathy into how the civil service works, and actually how many people within the civil service, which is often derided, are excellent people that are there because they're trying to do something good.
Which is probably a theme as well we're going to pick up on later, because you seem to have built a career in the UK actually working with government and working with people who are trying to do things even in the face of overwhelming odds and sort of and challenges. So tell us about the ADE now. So, before we sort of get into your role now, can you just sort of introduce the ADE a little bit for our listeners?
Yeah. So thank you very much for indulging the acronym, because it is a mouthful to use the full thing. But Association for Decentralised Energy, ADE, we're a trade association, so essentially an industry group, and we represent over 160 organizations across the energy industry in the UK. Those are like really, really varied organizations, everything from kind of large energy suppliers, energy multinationals, down to someone that makes the pipe that goes into a heat network or puts insulation into people's houses. So a real mix of characters, but we focus on driving the decarbonisation of heat, championing the role of industry in the transition, and pushing for UK homes and businesses to be energy efficient and smart. So our real USP, I would say, is a focus on the energy users. We're so often left out of the conversation, but we really believe that by getting them engaged and investing in these technologies and approaches, that will be the best decarbonisation experience, and users will benefit, the system will benefit, and it will work best for us all.
And the ADE's sort of evolved quite a lot over the last, I would say, sort of 6 years, hasn't it?
It has. It's actually
And
evolved over
really
the last
broad.
53 years, because we
Yeah.
are like, old is a strong word, but people presume that we're quite spring chickeny, because I guess we are quite progressive,
Mm,
and we're scrappy, and trying to make some stuff happen. But the association began life as the District Heating Association,
mm,
and became over time the CHPA, so Combined Heat and Power Association, but has slowly but surely built and merged and incorporated other views and work streams, and stopped at some point around 10 years ago being about a technology, and started being about an approach to energy, which I think is so important. And also it helps us when we go and talk to people. It helps us get
yeah.
invited to go and talk to people, because a politician doesn't necessarily know what we're going to advocate for. If we
Mm.
are the District Heating Association, they presume we're going to get in the room and say, do more
Do
district
district
heating.
heating. Yeah.
um, and like, that's fine, and that's cool, but because we have this focus on like whole systems, the energy user, how things integrate and work together to deliver, there's a lot of respect there, I think, and we do get invited into more rooms, because people say, like, what do you really think about this? How will this
Yeah.
work? Which has been really exciting. So over the last 10 years, we've grown from being like 5 people around one table in the office, all running at something, to being 21 people with a clear organizational structure and documented processes, another
Yeah.
passion of mine, which has been super exciting. And, we've gone from just doing kind of policy advocacy to doing a lot of policy, a lot of, political engagement. We do research. So like a much bigger swathe of stuff.
We'll probably come back to the ADE a bit when we talk about your role a bit more later on, but I want to kind of go 36,000 feet and kind of get your view. Where is the UK on the decarbonisation journey, in your opinion? And but a lot of our listeners have heard a lot of stuff about what's happening stateside.
Yeah.
But the UK, especially, we've got the post-Brexit challenges, we've got the challenges with the war in Ukraine, and the gas crisis that we've got, on fuel price crisis at the moment. So could you sort of talk about, where is climate change on the agenda? Where's decarbonisation on the agenda? And what's happening in the energy space that you're seeing at the moment?
Yeah. I guess it's such a mixed bag. It's really interesting, because I think definitely as an Australian arriving in the UK 7 years ago,
Mm.
I felt so heartened by how far ahead it seemed. Climate change taken quite seriously. Shortly after that, well, in relatively recent times, net zero target embedded into legislation. Real action and rhetoric, and seeing like
Because
the
it's
whole country.
Yeah, because it's cross-party in the UK. There's no part of
Yeah,
the political spectrum that doesn't say, climate change is real, it's man-made, and we need to do something about it. Which I think
absolutely.
quite rare, isn't it,
Oh,
around the world?
and coming from Australia,
Very different. Yeah.
like, if you believed in doing anything about the environment, you are left wing at
Right.
that stage. Like, it was just it was such a defining thing. So it felt amazing to be here, and to have that attitude. And it's been kind of funny and sad to see in the last few years a slip from that leadership position,
Mm.
um to you know to being like partially distracted by some stuff, but also just to get caught up in some like inactivity, or arguing about some small details. And
Yeah.
now, like, Australia is like, I've stopped being embarrassed to be an Australian in climate overseas. And it's like, we're seeing people, countries that have started to move much later, but are thus seizing the need to move really quickly, and they're running at it. And what's going on in the States is also um, driving a lot of competition. And
Yes.
that's like exciting, but it's also scary, because what we're starting to hear is like, well, we'll just leave the UK and we'll go and do this work in the States. And it's like, no, we need you here working. And I still believe there is a really strong political consensus to meet net zero and to take action. There was a lot of distraction over the last 2 years from a small vocal minority that I don't.
Political mess.
Yeah, and like so much going on, but it's rubber hits the road time. Like there needs to be real action, and industry is by and large they're ready to deliver, and like most of what we need exists already, but they just need the frameworks and for politicians to kind of sign on and then get out of the way so that this can happen. And like 2040 is too late for these decisions. 2030 is too late for some of these decisions. It's like, this is the decade that matters. This is when we need to be making some big calls.
Yeah. How you make decisions, I think, is going to be a really interesting one. Actually, that would be a good one to come back to. On the political stuff, the cross-party consensus is really useful because it means they're not debating climate change. But the other thing I've seen is it's very hard for climate to be a point of difference, and it's very hard for it's not a vote winner, and energy strategy isn't a vote winner as well. And in fact, if anything, if you do it wrong, it's a sort of a net zero gain, and you can actually lose votes if you get it wrong. So politicians are quite scared of leading, and if you ally that with, there's been some seriously big challenges in the world in the last 4 years, through Brexit, the coronavirus crisis, into the war in Ukraine, and the political upheaval in the UK has meant that there hasn't been any leadership. I mean, we've had, how many people have you been sitting opposite as Secretary of State for Energy and Business Energy, and they obviously change their title every 3 or 4 years as well. But we've had like 4 or 5, haven't we, in 5 years?
Yeah. It's been really hard, and like it's difficult because just as you start to make progress with one, they move on
and they understand.
Which is really, it's quite frustrating. I guess it's been a good reminder that some of us live and breathe energy
every day.
24/7 is a bit strong, but we find ourselves in a bubble, and we talk a lot about getting out of our echo chamber, but we don't do it very often. And most people, ordinary people, don't think about energy as not high on their list. What's been interesting this past year, and something that has really come out of the war in Ukraine and the gas price crisis that's accompanied that, has been energy is now pub chat in the UK. And it's not that people care about energy anymore, but they care about the cost of living. And that is interesting and something that needs to be seized upon. And it reminds us like what everyday people really care about and how we should be framing some discussions.
I got a message in my old boys from school WhatsApp chat from a friend saying, how do I deal with the cost of living crisis? And we were sharing notes on turning down your boiler flow temperature. And I said to them, I said, guys, I can't believe I'm discussing flow temperature with you on a WhatsApp group. But I've
never been more grateful to have such a nerdy LinkedIn network because there's all this.
You can find the answers.
Sharing of advice. But I work in energy. My husband also works in energy. And there are points that we're sitting around going, oh, we don't know what the best step is. And that's problematic. Like, if we don't know, how do we expect others to know? Even people that want to act, even if it's for climate reasons. I don't really mind what the reason is, as long as they want to act. But
I was going to ask you this sort of fundamental question. I think there's a misconception that people want to choose everything all the time. And actually, if you think about it, you go back in time, you don't choose. It's a fake choice. Can I switch my electricity and gas provider? Because it's the same electrons coming down the network, down the network, and the same gas coming through the pipe, right? You can just pay a different company, and then they trade on the wholesale market. So it's a kind of a spurious choice, which has actually been shown up in the last few years as the UK energy markets had real trouble with pricing, whereas some of our European counterparts haven't had that trouble. But part of it, I think, is linked to the structure of the market. But do you think that consumers? I'm interested in your point of view on this. Do you think consumers need lots of choices? Do you think the way that we decarbonize is by presenting everybody with lots of options and asking them what they want? Or do you think that do you think that we should be leading consumers through this by making choices for them? And how do you deal with this sort of fundamental challenge of things might get done to society by the government that are the right thing to do, that people won't choose? They won't say, I wanted that. Like in the moment, for example, there's a trial going on for hydrogen going into the gas grid in the northwest with Cadent Gas, and local residents are up in arms because it's just been done to them with absolutely no consultation. And don't want to get into a debate about hydrogen for heating, which, as you know, I think is ridiculous. But I'm interested in that consumer choice angle, and what role does the customer play in this this climate transition?
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting and such a critical thing that we sometimes don't grapple with as an industry because we're busy talking about the tech and not about the people. But this is something, we say at the AD that we are about the energy users. What does that mean? What do we think is the right way to treat users? And I don't think it's clear and simple. I think that we need to bring people with us.
Yes.
Does that mean that they get to actively choose each thing? Question mark. My personal opinion is the UK's really made a rod for its own back in terms of the energy market narrative around choice. So if you go to Europe, people much less concerned with that because that's not what has been sold to them as the way to make the market work. Yeah. Whereas in the UK, it's been very much this mentality of, choice will protect you from the energy market, which is kind of out to get you. So you'll be able to switch, and that choice will be
energy company. Yeah,
absolutely. And now that's really stopping us because it means that there is such a low level of trust between consumers and energy companies. And it also means that there's an expectation that choice is essential to you getting the best outcome for you, even though you're asking people to potentially make choices about stuff where they are not the best placed person to know what will work best. So that is really interesting, but we need to be realistic about the politics of it, and that is the overriding narrative in the energy market. And politicians pretty much will not sign on to something which is just done unto people. So what we've been trying to work with is what's the right mix between choice and mandating, essentially. How do you bring people with you elsewhere on that spectrum? So things like, can you offer people choices but heavily incentivize one? So if you are in a zone, could everything in the zone work to support you towards one choice, which is the best choice, says the experts for that area? But you're still, you have the option to not. You could go your own way, but you don't get all the perks and bells and whistles and stuff because you're doing your own thing. But I think like engagement, chatting to people, those are the more important parts, really, than ultimately them making the choice. I really do believe that. I just don't know whether politicians will get there.
No. And whether they want to get there because it won't necessarily impact them in their political lifetime, and it isn't a vote winner. But going to the positive side of things, the UK's blew away some renewables targets, and can you talk a little bit about how that success was happened? The most recently is the CFD, but I think it goes back to like 2010 when the government really did a big push for renewables. And I think it is one of the successes of the last 15 years in European energy policy is the huge success of offshore wind around the coast of the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually there are some great examples of how we the UK, we the people have managed to go harder and faster on some of these technologies than was ever anticipated. So offshore wind is a great example where like just a smashing amount of electricity is coming to the grid, which is totally renewable. EVs, rollout of EVs is another great example, where take-up's just been astronomical. Even more recently, the UK ran something called the Demand Flexibility Service, DFS, as a trial over winter. And this is kind of National Grid asking the everyday person in their house if they would mind turning off the lights for an hour on a day where there was like a strong demand on the system to try and help balance the grid. And we saw that people over delivered often. Like people were not just willing, but they over delivered. So I think there's masses of potential, and actually this is like something that I'm really passionate about at the moment. Is we can get really tied up in how hard it's going to be and talking about the challenges and how scary stuff is, and like if we don't get it right, what happens. And that is all serious and true, but there's so many reasons to be hopeful, and I think that we need to speak to people with hope and with positivity about how good stuff is going to be and how much we do have the capacity to change, because like we've already made huge strides in terms of global temperature forecasts. Like there's still a way to go, but
well, I think it was last year I read that China installed 120 gigawatts of new renewables capacity, which is the equivalent of the UK's entire generation, and they installed it in 1 year. And
it's totally bonkers.
It's crazy. So some of the stuff that's happening around the world, I think, is inspiring, and I think it's maybe something we want to do with this podcast is try and get out and see what's happening around the world a little bit. And the renewables success in the UK was huge, but there was a counter stat which I read, which was that in the UK in January 2020, 41% of energy that the UK used in January came from offshore wind, runaway success, or for wind power, I think it was actually, so it included onshore. And then in the following year, in 2021, it was only 2% for the same period of time. And so I think what we're seeing in the UK now is a real issue with baseload and the intermittency of the renewables that are coming through. And that's where these incentives for grid are started to come in, is because there isn't the baseload and there isn't the peaking capacity as well. That the government are looking at how can we manage demand. And I suppose that kind of moving into the customer world where you're looking at small 20 megawatts, 10 megawatt, 5 megawatt, 50 megawatt generation dotted around in different places. Can we get that turned on at the right time? Battery storage, grid response services, that's kind of going right into your sweet spot, isn't it? You know, it's not big generation. It's like, right, we've got to get customers to go with us. So are you getting a kind of a ramp up now in excitement in the government in the ADE's offering?
I would say yes and no. In a sense of we are hitting the awkward elbow of the transition, right? Where the energy system was built around totally different energy. So it was built to be big, chunky, centralized generation, and to flow one way, and and
it didn't matter if you wasted loads.
No, it didn't care. That won't work in the future, and it's starting to not work now, and the system doesn't support all this new stuff. So we're starting to see it creak and break a bit in parts, and that is scary to government. And the temptation you can see is to lean backwards rather than forwards, and you just try and keep the system working rather than make some bold choices, because it's not small tweaks that need to happen to make a system fit for the future. It is relatively big tweaks and some very revolutionary changes. And there is some appetite for that. There's some excitement for that. So that there's like active consultations, there's lots of conversations, there's great chat. But we still need to convert that into some actual commitment to doing some tricky but cool things to enable this future system and support that distributed generation, to increase storage, to look at connections. And I think that that's really scary to politicians as well, because when there's like 6 things that they have to understand, so like there's 6 things that make power and send it everywhere, that feels very controllable. When there's hundreds or thousands of aspects of that system, and some make power and some distribute it and some flex it, some save it, they work in at different times, some work together, some work to counterbalance each other, that feels really fraught. That's like such an amorphous beast, and that's slightly terrifying to them. So there's still loads of work to do, but I think there is a genuine excitement. And decentralized energy is a bit of a buzz phrase, which is great.
Yes, it is. So let's go back to you a little bit, and then we're going to come back at the end and we're going to talk about some big answers and some big solutions that you think that we should be moving forward with. So you were at Ofgem. When did you join the ADE?
So I joined about 6 years ago now, initially in a policy role. So I saw an ad for a heat policy senior manager at this interesting looking company, and I was like, all right, I'll go for a chat and see. Like I wasn't really sure necessarily what they were about, and I had the funnest interview. With Tim, who was the old chief exec.
This is
We
Tim
essentially
Rotherham, who was the CEO back then. Yeah.
Who's a great man and excellent energy expert as well. We essentially just had a Barney for an hour. So you spent an hour arguing about what people cared about.
You need to explain how to Barney.
Oh yeah. Had a well-natured dispute. Essentially just bickered for an hour about what's important.
Like shit for an hour. Yeah.
Rip shreds off each other. And it was great. It was just so much fun. And I left and I thought, I want to work there. So that was really exciting. And by the time I joined, it felt like Tim and I were old friends, because we'd been having these arguments back and forward about what was important, and we just I feel like we really clicked, and that made me excited to join. And then once I got in the door, I was like, oh, I am so for what this place is about. And I want to make the most of it and do what I can here. So I've kind of been at the AD since then. I moved into doing internal operations. I mentioned my passion for written down processes and organizational structure. So
you'd hate working with me. Every process that's ever been written down, I don't follow it, and I come up with my own way of doing it. It's horrendous.
Yep, that's why we work like this, and not the same organization. No, but the thing is, in defense of processes, I love processes because I love people, and I think that processes help people understand what they can expect of a situation and what's expected of them, and that makes us feel safe and comfortable, and
then
lets us focus on delivery.
The creative freedom. I am now a fan of processes. I learned to love process when I was at Vattenfall, and I saw how it was able to free the business up to go and make decisions and be innovative and be creative. But my instinct is to mistrust them, which is a bad instinct that I have to resist all the time. So I
totally understand.
You were in an operational excellence role. So, and actually it was a kind of a new role, wasn't it? It was because the organization had grown, and it had basically got to this point where everyone was doing stuff and nobody did it in the same way. And it was all a bit disorganized, and there was loads of innovation and great ideas, but you needed structure. So you did that for like a couple of years, didn't you?
Yeah. I did that for 3 years, I think. COVID warps time, but I'm pretty sure it was 3 years. But I guess I would like to think I wasn't confined just to the processes. I guess by virtue of being in the organization for that long and having dabbled in different work streams, and through capturing processes and working with teams, I had this kind of big picture view of what we were trying to do. So I was like quite bossy, getting involved with telling lots of teams, oh, I think you should do this,
Charmingly
or we
bossy.
should.
Charmingly bossy.
Well, I think charm is in the eye of the beholder, but I think I was quite involved with pushing for particular strategic directions, and then when my old boss Ian left, the board approached me to take on the role of chief exec, based on that
Yeah,
charming bossiness,
exactly.
amongst some other things.
Exactly. And it's a buzzy group of people, the ADE. You've kind of got
Oh my
lots of
God, it's the
high
best team.
energy, yeah, really smart, really intelligent, go-getters that go out and sort of try and change the world, and actually quite often do change the world, even
Yeah.
though not, the budget's not massive. Some of our American listeners would be surprised to hear what you can do with the budget that you have. Maybe that's a subject for a different podcast. But you became CEO. When were you made CEO?
January last year. So
Right.
just over a year in post so far.
And something else you and I have in common is that we've certainly over the last few years, we've been working together to sort of try and champion diversity and representation, particularly in the district heating sector, where we were both working for a while, but more broadly across industry. And I know it's something you're really passionate about. Do you want to sort of touch on that? One of the things that strikes me always about the ADE is how many people there are from ridiculously diverse backgrounds with completely different points of view that challenge the perception of everyone has to be an engineer, for example, which I love.
Yeah.
Can you touch on that a little bit for me?
Yeah, that's another deep passion of mine, which that will be my second rant. But my first one is, yeah, I think the ADE team as a great microcosm. I mean, I must say they are the most like talented, bright group of individuals. And what I love even more is that every year on the staff survey, the thing that they say they love about coming to work is the rest of the team. And
That's
like,
great.
it's not it's the kindness and like support that they think is the most appealing thing, rather than the access to intellect, which I think is just like amazing in that kind of environment. They're so cool, and they always go on and do incredible things. So props
And
to the team.
often it's sort of a quasi lobbying role, right? Often in lobbying organizations, you like people who want to be close to power as well. They like to be seen next to Lord blah blah and at this event and speaking, but that doesn't seem to be the motivating factor for your guys.
No, and I think you're right that there is a lot of diversity. I mean, there's some that's quite obvious, and like I'm very proud that we have such strong female representation.
Yeah.
We also have a decent age spectrum, but we have been, that's been something we've been really purposeful about as well, and in trying to push ourselves in what we think about as diverse. So one of the things we've looked at in recent years is like, are we a political echo chamber? Our organization tends to attract a lot of the same politics,
Yeah.
because it's people that care about this issue. Are we testing ourselves? Are we limiting ourselves in any way? So there is a real mix of backgrounds and views and preferences and working styles, and that comes with its own challenges as well, but it means that what we make is better. And I think that's what Mike, you and I have often talked about in terms of the energy industry, and I'm so passionate about diversity in the energy industry does not equal only getting women into STEM.
No.
Because and when we talk about the energy industry as if it is only about technical skills and engineering, it undermines the importance of all the other roles that will go into making the transition a success. Like, we definitely do need engineers and we need scientists. We also need communicators and lawyers and marketing people and creative people. We need commsers, we need people in HR, we need so many different things. And when we pretend that they're not a part of our industry, why would you want to be a part of the industry that doesn't acknowledge you? So getting more of a chat around the various skills required and supporting all of those, and looking at different forms of diversity. So gender is an obvious one. We've also been doing some work lately on neurodiversity within the industry. I think like all these aspects are important, and sometimes people avoid tackling them because they're scared of getting it wrong, or saying
Yeah.
something wrong, putting their
Yeah.
foot in it. But
Yeah.
like doing nothing is worse than doing something
Doing it
imperfectly.
wrong.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. And interestingly, picking up on the sort of the point about creativity, well, you can now go online, you can feed some data into an AI bot, and it can design your district heating network for you. It can do anything, and it can do it faster than any person can do. I think a theme that we've talked about before is this ability to create narratives and tell stories and emote and relate to people and bring people with you. You talked about it with consumers, but I think it's important for all groups. And can you talk a little bit about that? Because it's something that you're really good at. You're really good at telling a story, and you're really good at being engaging. It's obviously something that inspires you. But what role do you think that has to play in how we accelerate the energy transition?
Oh, I think it's so critical. And actually, this was something that started from my time in the Pacific, because so I was a communicator working with a bunch of scientists who would essentially hand over their science and be like, I'm done.
Yeah.
It's done. The work is done. It's all there. And I guess my overarching message is like, data isn't useful if it's not usable. Like if you're not allowing people to understand it and do something with it, then what value does it have really? So we need to connect with people to and bring them along with us, as we were talking about before with consumer choices. It's understanding people on a really human level, and part of that is storytelling and letting them know who we are as humans, and finding the things that are important to them, and talking to them about that, and talking to them in a way that works for them rather than being quite snobby about and sorry to the industry, I'm not suggesting you're all like this, but the particular terms or ways in which we are comfortable explaining stuff. It's like, talk to people in a language they understand. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah. There's an interesting thing that jumping into a completely different sector, I quite into my rugby. And I listen to some podcasts about rugby every now and again. And one of the big themes at the moment is that viewers' habits are changing. So the generation of rugby fans at the moment, and sports fans generally, don't consume sport by watching 90-minute, 80-minute games anymore. They actually mostly consume it by watching clips. And the best sports in the world are the ones that are embracing. I mean, there's some pretty dark, crazy stuff happening on TikTok, if I'm honest, but there's also some really great stuff, which is getting content out to people. And so these kind of short clips, and how do you put together little vignettes and little stories and little sound bites that get out in front of people? There's absolutely none of that for the climate transition out there. It's all come to a conference. It's as if it's 1998 and we all have to go and sit in a room and listen to some, unfortunately, middle-aged white dude talk about their experience of installing a CHP and how they're doing another CHP this year, and gas will continue to be. I'm painting a worst case picture. There's clearly not there's lots of stuff happening other than that. But I do think that's a big thing. I think how we take the message out, how we excite people, how we inspire people is really important.
No, I think it's really interesting. I mean, I'm not knocking conferences because we hold a smashing one each year.
Yeah.
But I did have an argument with someone at an event a few weeks ago because they'd made some joke about the Instagrammers or something. And we were talking about skills gaps in the sector. And it's like, why do you think that Instagrammers don't have a place in the sector? Like in the property sector. So this is my my Sunday morning indulgence, is eating croissants and reading the property section of the paper, which is
Dreaming
just
of the houses in London that you could buy.
that I could never buy. But what they've seen is a huge uptick in people that are buying houses or becoming interested in developments based on Instagram and presumably TikTok. But I'm like, I'm too old to know how TikTok works properly. And I was saying, like, why do we think we're too good for that? Like, to think that, you know, that this is very legitimate media that reaches a load of people, and to say like we're above that means that it's us that's missing the opportunity.
But
and it's good practice to talk to people in a much simpler way. And like, politicians have so much to think about and do as well, that they're not going to read your entire 300-page report. Like for
No.
sure, do the work to feel confident that you've got the facts to back stuff up, but you should be able to say stuff in a compelling, concise way. Otherwise you don't understand it well enough.
I always used to say to my teams, in fact I still do say to my teams, you bump into the person that you've been waiting to meet for a year, and you're trying to do this deal with, or you're trying to do this contract with, or you're trying to work with, right? And you bump into them in an elevator, and you've got that amount of time, and it's the classic elevator pitch challenge, right? Say what you need to say in the 28 seconds that you've got going up to the 10th floor. And no one does it. No one can do it. It's so hard to do. But I think the distilling things and communicating is something that's really hard for a lot of people, and they're scared of it, so they don't do it. And I think it's important that therefore people that can do it do more of it. So we need to get you on more podcasts is what I've decided to do after this. So going back to the answers, because communication is clearly a very important part of it, but technology is going to play a massive role. So I want to sort of steer you for the end of the podcast to just now talk about what are the things that you think we need to see in the UK in terms of, I don't want to just focus on policy. Everyone talks about policy, but what are the big trends that you think are going to happen in the next 5 years? Technological trends, transitions from customers, buying trends, or it could be policies, it could be economic changes and incentives that could be brought through. Basically anything. Get your crystal ball out, look forward 5 years, and tell me what you think you'd like to see happen. And let's talk through those things.
Interesting. I mean, I think the thing that springs to mind overwhelmingly is more integration. So it will be less of pick one tech and more of like really cool offers coming forward that bundle stuff. And like whatever a person or business's bundle might be will be different depending on who they are, where they are, what their needs are. But this much more holistic approach to, we see you, this is what you need, this is what we can offer you. And like hopefully different energy companies pitching different bundles and packages, like vying for how to serve people better.
Have you seen what Greg Jackson and Octopus are doing at the moment with they got a new heat pump? I mean, they're going toe to toe with British Gas in the UK. For our listeners, they're big. British Gas are the kind of the biggest energy company in the UK. I don't know how many customers they got. It's over 10 million customers that they serve, but they also have a fleet of hundreds of thousands of people in vans running around, and per the name, right, installing new gas boilers. But this year they've just launched a heat pump offer, and I think I can't remember what the price point was, but I know that Octopus have just come out with a £3,500 heat pump solution. And there's they're jumping straight into a price war and they're going for it. But Octopus also do EV, so you can get an EV charging system. They do battery storage for your home. And they obviously provide power and electricity and smart meters. So they're kind of going to that place, aren't they?
They are.
Which is exciting. They don't see themselves as an energy company. They see themselves as a tech company.
Yeah, and we're seeing this increasingly amongst membership is like, I mean, they probably consider themselves like utility services, but it's a services mindset where it's like, what do you need and how much of that can we provide for you? Which also works to benefit the businesses providing it, because they can flex internally to get the most out of their resources, which I think is really, really cool. And there's like an actual attractive thing there. It's not how the market was built, so it needs some unblocking. I think the other thing we're definitely going to see is some areas really just like taking the transition and running with it. And often that boils down to like a particularly passionate person or group of people. And what I would really like to see is that is not just about well-to-do councils that can afford it getting the first foot or the upper hand, but to see a decent spread of different regions trying some stuff, learning, and then that being used to help others along for the ride as well. So I think that could be really exciting, but I think people being more involved, and by that I don't mean necessarily being actively involved and making choices necessarily, because I think we can over-egg how much people want to be like a part of things, but they're being considered and consulted and being brought along in a way that they just haven't been before.
Yeah, totally. And looking at the sort of the energy system, and this, we've had some success in renewables. If you look at the energy system, roll me forward 5 years, what do you want to have seen happen, whether it's policy or big investment in certain areas?
Yeah, so there's a consultation going on at the moment called the Review of Electricity Market Arrangements, REMA, which I think is mistitled because really it's a review of the
Sexy title.
energy market.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. There is the potential in there to like break stuff and do it better. And what I would love to see is some really savvy civil servants and bold government saying, this is the time that we're going to break it and build it better, rather than kind of tweaking around the edges. And I think that could really enable distributed generation, much more flexibility, which will allow us to do more with what we've got. There's huge issues with constraints on the grid at the moment in the UK. It will help to address that and mean that new build goes to where it needs to most. There needs to be massive amounts of energy efficiency work happening, and we've got to tackle the decarbonisation of heat, because it's been left lingering too long, and now is the time.
Oh, my favorite one ever is the 72 terawatt hours of waste heat in London and 66 terawatt hours of demand. And yet we still continue to install 1.6 million new boilers every year in the UK.
Absolutely. And what I would love, a particularly niche love, I would love to see any local council or region that had a river running through it, having a conversation, a real conversation about using the waste heat that is found in the rivers,
yes,
to heat the city, because I think that is a beautiful story about using communal resources for communities, and the amount of the nation that we could decarbonize just by using waste heat in rivers and streams is incredible. So
yes,
let's
definitely
make use of that.
Very good. Good. Okay, last question for you, Lily. I'm going to roll you forward even further. Okay, I'm going to roll you forward 25 years. Right, you've been knighted at this point for services to energy and charm, and I want you to look back. How do you want to be remembered, and what do you want your legacy to be in the energy sector? And
that's really interesting. There's
sorry,
like a human.
I didn't pre-warn you on this one. You see,
no, it's like where a human question meets a professional ambition question. I mean, the thing that first sprung to mind is kind. I'm about people, so if I can be remembered as empowering people to get some stuff done, that would be glorious. I would love that. And kind of maybe as part of that, by being someone who embraced being a fairly non-traditional energy sector person, and didn't try and be too smooth in corporate and like got their jazz hands out, because that's who I am. So if we can have more of that, if I could be any part of that, I would be really proud.
Well, I to give you some feedback, I think you are being that at the moment. I think you're incredibly good at bringing people together in the sector, which is exactly what's needed. And I think it is the role of the ADE as well. So thank you very much for your time today. Thank you for your work in the UK energy sector, and your energy and your smiles and your energy, your drive and enthusiasm.
Thank you, Mike.
Really lovely to talk to you.
Yeah, it's so fun. Let's do this again.
Do it again. We'll pick a new subject. Take care.
Indeed. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, everybody.
Our leadership in science and industry, our hopes for peace and security, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men and for the progress of all people.